on in D.C., and the results are always very, very poor. They're never really doing the business of the American people. They're really focusing on themselves. They're focusing on their power. They're focusing on doing things to benefit those people that are connected to the political class up there. I mean, we saw it with this proposal to so-called, the border proposal, which was a total farce. Biden can close the border right now if he wanted to. I mean, he could do it. He opened it to begin with. And, we've had problems with this border for a long time, but it's never been this bad. He's doing that. He's done that intentionally. They just found an al-Shabaab terrorist that came through the border. That's now making news. We know that's probably not even close to the only one. So this is just what we've come to expect. And so what do they do in Washington? They create a proposal that says he can shut down the border once there are more than 5,000 illegals a day. Well, why would you want to codify that and allow that's over almost 2 million illegals a year that you're just authorizing effectively? They want to give benefits to illegals. They're going to continue to exacerbate the problem. So that's what passes for leadership in Washington, something that will make the problem worse. Something that will benefit people that are connected to the ruling class, but not benefiting the American people. So we've seen this time and time again. I mean, just think about where we are fiscally in this country. From 1789 to the year 2000, this country racked up about $5.6 trillion in debt. And I remember at the time people would talk about $5.6 trillion, but in reality, that was 211 years to do $5.6 trillion. Today, 2024, we're at $34 trillion in debt. And if you look at that $34 trillion, I mean, a lot of that has been over the last 10 years where they've added trillions and trillions and trillions to the debt with really no thought about it, and they just want to keep doing it. So we see these things time and time again, what happens about putting the political class first, putting the American people last. Think about how we do it in Florida. There's a national debt clock in New York City that has the debt, federal debt going up. It's been there for many decades. I got a friend of mine in Congress from Kentucky that created one that you can wear on your pocket of your jacket that actually has the debt clock being run up. I don't know how he does, like GPS or something to do it, and he wears it on the House floor to kind of tell the folks, the other members of Congress, hey, this is what you're racking up. Not that it shamed them at all, but nevertheless, I think that's the intent. Well, he gave me one, and I looked at it, I'm like, well, that's nice, but I wonder if you could engineer one to do the debt of the state of Florida. Because if you did the debt of the state of Florida, you wouldn't be counting up, you'd be counting down, because we've paid off a quarter of our state's debt. And not only that, we've run surpluses, we've cut taxes every year, we have paid down a large portion of the debt. Debts continue to go down. I know Speaker Renner has been helpful we've put in the budget accelerated debt repayment, so we've actually retired more debt quickly. Now, we're only going to do that if it makes financial sense. I mean, there's some times where if you retire it too soon, then you'll pay more than if you just did the normal schedule. So we're not doing it just for show. I mean, we're doing it to get the best bang for the buck, but we are going to accelerate that again this year and continue to do that. So it can be done. Also, me as governor, I have a line item veto. So if they put a spending bill on my desk, I can veto out individual items that are in the spending bill. So sometimes there'll be things that your tax dollars shouldn't be spent on, and so we can veto that out. Federally, they put a big bill on the president's desk, and you have to either sign everything or veto everything. That's why we have money going to promoting things like transgenderism in Bangladesh, your money doing that. Why is that? Well, it's because they pack so much stuff into there. So there's huge, huge problems that we see. Ultimately, you can elect some better people, that can make a difference, but the incentives are designed to produce poor outcomes. The incentives are designed for more debt. The incentives are designed for politicians to put themselves first. The incentives are designed to have a separate ruling class. So what are we going to do about it? We actually have tools to deal with this. From the American people and dealing with our individual states. Washington's never going to reform itself. It's going to require us working in our individual states using the tools that the Founding Fathers gave us to be able to take power away from D.C. and return it back to the American people, to make sure that the incentives are to produce good government rather than self-serving government. And so that's what we're here to announce to do. With Speaker Renner's help, as well as Kathleen Passidomo in the Senate, and with my support, the Florida legislature is going to be certifying a series of amendments, constitutional reforms under Article 5 of the Constitution that will rein Washington in and that will hold Washington accountable. First, we are certifying for amendment term limits for members of Congress. And this is something that's long overdue. We have it in Florida. You know what? It works in Florida because people have a limited amount of time. Their incentives are to make a difference, not to stay in office for 30 or 40 years. And so being able to do that, Congress will never do it itself. We have the ability through the states to impose that on Congress, and that's going to make a big, big difference. You should go, serve for a limited amount of time, and then live under the laws that should pass. I think people would probably approach things a little bit different. Second thing, many states have it. Florida's one. There's others that do. And I would say that Florida's production is much better than the states that do not have it. Second reform is a requirement for a balanced budget at the federal level. We have that in Florida. We have to balance our budget every year, so you know going in that you have to get this done. You can't just put it on the credit card. Right now, the incentives are to put things on the credit card. That's the path of least resistance. That's how these guys stay in office longer. And who ends up with the bill? Well, it's future generations. And 34 trillion, 35, I don't know when the breaking point is, but at some point there is going to be a breaking point. And so why not rein in the big spenders, force them to make decisions? Most states have balanced budget requirements. There's no reason why the federal government should not as well. Third thing is you should give the president what I have as governor and what many governors have, a line item veto. If they put a massive spending bill on the president's desk, you should be able to veto individual line items. Just think how much pork you would be able to veto out of there. You could save hundreds of billions of dollars just by giving that line item veto. And so that's something that was actually passed in statute back in the 1990s. It was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. They basically said you had to do it through constitutional amendment. So we're now proposing this line item veto be done in a constitutional reform. And then finally, we want an amendment that says very simply that Congress shall make no law respecting the citizens of the United States that does not also apply to members of Congress themselves. They should not be able to exempt themselves. They should not be able to function as a separate ruling class. And so the good thing about all those reforms is, you know, it's not Republican, Democrat, Independent. I mean, if you ask people, should there be term limits for Congress, you get support across the board. Republican, Democrat, Independent, male, female, black, white. It doesn't matter. People believe that you should have term limits. If they say, should they have to balance the budget like Florida and other states, most people are going to say yes. Should they be able to exempt themselves from laws? No, of course not. People will say that. I remember when they did it on Obamacare, and even when Biden did the executive order on the COVID vax mandate, they exempted Congress from that. And you just think to yourself, I mean, give me a break. So these are really good reforms. It's using the tools that the Founding Fathers gave us to be able to reclaim this government for we the people. Because on our current course, I don't think you're going to see very good changes absent changing the incentives. And so these are the types of reforms I think the Founding Fathers would have looked kindly on. They recognized that states needed to be able to make these proposals because there was going to be times when the nation's capital was not going to be willing to reform itself. So I appreciate Speaker Renner stepping up. Florida had certified the term limits and the balanced budget amendment in the past. We want to do it again. We want to get this back on the front burner. We want to work with other states around this country to be able to use the tools that we have to rein in this out-of-control ruling class in D.C. So my hat's off to the Speaker for doing it. I look forward to working with the legislature so that they can bring this through this legislative session, and then we'll work with other states that want to work with us to be able to really put the people first for a change. So right now we have Speaker Renner is going to come up and say a few things, so why don't you come up here.
Well, I told our members on opening day that Florida's success in large part is built into our Constitution because, as the governor said, we have a term limits requirement as well as a balanced budget requirement. And on term limits, we're limited to 8 years, and I believe that allows for fresh ideas and better governance. It also, I tell members, look, have a sense of urgency. You've got 8 tries, 8 60-day sessions. Make the most of every single one. And because of that, people in Tallahassee were calling this last session the session of the century because we made the most of it. So that you don't have to be there for 30 years to get things done. We can get it done in a 60-day session. And so it's kind of like, if you have any hockey fans in the room, is, they have a line change. The team comes out, they skate as hard as they can, and then they get off the ice and they let a fresh set of legs come on the ice. So that's what term limits really represents. And then on the balanced budget, look at us. I mean, I'll tell you, and it's certainly true in Congress, even Republicans like to spend money. And if they don't have those constraints, as they don't in D.C., they spend and print money, where now you need an extra $11,000 in income to pay for the things you could pay for in 2021 because of Biden inflation. And so it's important that we have a balanced budget at the federal level. In Florida, we balance our budget. We set aside $11 billion in reserves. As the governor said, we paid down debt early. And even with that, we returned $2.7 billion to the people who know how to spend it best, the taxpayers. No one will ever confuse us for the federal government. And I can say out loud as a legislator, when we talk about the line item veto for a governor, look, we're busy in that 60 days trying to do the best things we can for the public safety and education. Do turkeys slip through the budget process? Or bad spending measures, do they slip through? Absolutely they slip through. And that's why you need a governor like America's greatest governor, Ron DeSantis, to be able to look at those and say, look, we've got to pare back. We're doing that with our initial budget this year. And with the governor's leadership, we're going to make sure we get back to those pre-COVID levels and make sure that we send a signal to the rest of the states and the federal government that they should do the same. And then, of course, we don't legislate for ourselves exemptions that we impose on everyone else, but by God, Congress ought to do that. So these are 4 measures that can really, truly help rescue our country. I appreciate the governor's leadership on this issue, and we're going to get it done. Thank you, guys, and God bless you.
Now we have from the FGA, Taryn Bragnon from here in Naples.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of these 4 amendments. When you think of America, you don't just dwell on the constraints of red tape or the shadows of government debt. You proudly reflect on our vibrant tapestry of our history. From the courageous act of the Declaration of Independence to that innovative spirit that's strongly alive today, giving the world life-changing inventions. Our nation's heartbeat is not in the halls of federal power, but it's in the spirit of our people and the legacy of our states. Today, in the spirit of the Founding Fathers, we're excited to join the Governor and the Speaker and to be reminded of our Founding Fathers' wisdom and vision for a nation that's not burdened by debt or stifled by these endless tenures of government. I'm pleased to join them as they have shown how to lead our state, both with common sense, limits on government, while at the same time expanding freedom and opportunity for all. These 4 amendments take lessons from Florida to Washington, D.C., where they're sorely needed. Term limits, to ensure that a Congress that's fresh, vibrant, and truly representative. It turns out, as Speaker Renner said, we all do better with a deadline. And seniority is not a meritocracy. Term limits empower voters and they give deadlines to elected officials. It works in Florida, and it's vital for Washington. A balanced budget amendment. It's not just a fiscal measure, but it's a moral imperative. And likewise, the line item veto would restore accountability. Again, both work in Florida and are vital for Washington. And lastly, no one is above the law, most of all lawmakers. From King John and the Magna Carta 800 years ago to Washington, D.C. today, we're all equal under the law. This movement that the governor outlined is about ensuring that the spirit of America is reflected not just in our past glories, but in our present actions and in the future that we're all building for our children and grandchildren. It's a union of states and individuals, and we honor the essence of our nation: freedom, bravery, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to freedom and prosperity for all. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and look, we're excited. The speaker mentioned about really doubling down on fiscal responsibility. He came in with a very reasonable budget proposal. Ours was very reasonable. Now, our state is a growing state, so like we're building more schools, we're building more roads. I mean, we know that that's just what you have to do, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're continuing to retire debt, running surpluses, cutting taxes, and so we're going to be able to do that over these next couple months, I think, in a really significant way. And if you look, just think about the comparisons. A lot of these other states, I mean, California, they're running like a $60 billion deficit. Illinois is financially insolvent, basically. New York, they have millions fewer people than we do in Florida now, and yet their budget's twice the size of our budget. And yet, if you look, we have better infrastructure, roads, services, and education. Where is all that money going? Our state government per capita, the number of state employees, is the lowest in America. So we're doing these things with a small footprint and respecting taxpayers and making sure that the state is solvent for the long haul. And it's one thing to get through a legislative session, get through a budget season, be intact, but you're looking at 20, 30, 40 years down the road, and Florida is built for the long haul. A lot of these other states, their problems are only just beginning because of a lot of the bad choices they've made. So I think people here can feel good that we're in good financial shape, good fiscal shape, and you've got leaders in the legislature and then me as governor that are going to ensure that we continue to hold the line there. So I'm hoping that these proposals, that these amendments, that we'll be able to work with some other states to be able to get a critical mass here. I don't think there's anything that we're proposing that very many people would oppose. I mean, you always have people with their different views on some things, but these are really, really, I think, broadly appealing reforms. I think they're long overdue, and I think that they represent appropriate corrective measures to the ills that we have been witnessing in Washington, D.C., not just over the last few years, but really over the last many decades. Okay, with that, take some questions.
Governor.
Yep.
Governor, what kind of pushback, if any, do you expect for these proposals?
I don't think, hopefully not a lot. I think that people will say, oh, term limits. They'll always come up with rationales as to why. Some have said it lets the lobbyists run the show. Well, in Washington, D.C., the lobbyists are already running the show. Could it get any worse? They say, oh, well, the staff becomes more powerful. Most of these big spending bills that are thousands of pages that nobody reads, those are written by staff. They're not written by the members. And so I think all the things people will point to as a problem with term limits, that's already happening right now. And so I think term limits would create a really positive movement on the way forward. And look, people will say, well, people can vote who they want to vote in. The problem is with the benefits of incumbency and the way the system's set up, once you're in, you can stay in because of all the things that go into even getting elected. Term limits, it forces the turnover, forces new blood. It's been very good here in the state legislature. I mean, if you look at like Speaker Renner, he knew he had 2 years to be Speaker. That's it. So you either make the most of it or you don't, but you're not going to be governing in ways where you're trying to stay in office for the next 20 years because you're not. You're going to be gone. And I think it creates really, really good incentives, and the proof's in the pudding. We've governed well here. Our fiscal is great. It's not the same with Washington or some of these other states.
And Governor, you said on X that Joe Biden's weakness is getting our troops killed. The president said that the U.S. will respond to the death of the 3 service members. But how do you see this ending?
Weakness invites aggression. And Biden has been weak since the day he took office. He gave Iran a lifeline with massive reliefs and sanctions. Of course they're going to use that to do things like fund terrorism. And what's happened is I think his weakness has continued to embolden countries like Iran and terrorist groups. And so now they've been taking pot shots at our troops for a long time. This is not the first attack on U.S. troops. I mean, they've done 150, almost 200 attacks on U.S. troops with very little response. Well, if they can get away with it, of course they're going to continue to do it. A strong president would have that marker down that if you mess with U.S. service members, you're going to have hell to pay. Right now, our adversaries do not believe that's the case, and so they're going to continue doing this. But, those 3 service members should not have been killed. It's a result of a failed policy. And so I don't know what he's going to do going forward. I think that he's been lackluster on all these issues. But the reality is our troops are in harm's way. Our troops, he's inviting attacks on our troops because of his weakness, and that's wrong.
Governor.
So it's interesting. On balanced budget, there's actually been a lot that have done it over the years. There's a debate about do you have the requisite number of 34 to actually require this to be going to a vote. Different states have passed different language, but a lot have done balanced budget. I think what we're going to do is try to streamline that. Let's make sure who definitely has done it, who may have done a proposal that's maybe a little outdated, and see. Florida has already done the term limits about 10, 12 years ago. There's other states that have done that in the intervening time. I think the Speaker wanted to do it again, and I think this is right, is because, okay, let's get the spotlight back on this. We have some states that have done it. We're going to do it. And now let's take this case to some other states and say, wait, what did Florida just do? We're in a great spot because people look to us for leadership on a lot of these issues. So now they're going to see this. This is now back on the front burner, and as states are meeting in their legislative chambers, this is something that's very easy for them to certify going forward. So I think you could end up getting there with the balanced budget amendment, and I think the term limits is very popular. I think we've got some ways to go on that, but it's not a tough sell, and it's not a partisan issue. And it has appeal across any demographic line or partisan line you can do. So let's do it. Let's get this done. Let's stop complaining about Washington and do something to restrain Washington for a change.
Governor, how do you see the border crisis playing out?
Anybody else?
Governor, I want to thank you for the greater good of America, all Republicans and all great Americans for endorsing your rival, President Trump, and presidential elections. We're all behind you. We love you as our governor. Any comments on, do you feel good about our chances with your endorsement, others, and the Republican Party in general, stopping the infighting and coming together for the greater good to save this country? Any comment on that?
Well, obviously, I wouldn't have run if I didn't think my chances were the best on all of this. So I may not be the right guy. But look, I mean, you have, these things happen, and ultimately it's up for candidates to be able to, to go out there and make the case, going forward. I think Biden's been a failed president, but I also thought he was a failed candidate in 2020. And I didn't think that there was any way, but yet, here we are. So I think we live in some strange times, and that's just the nature of it. But ultimately, it's not just, the person with our jerseys in or not in. Yeah, that's fine. But it's like, are you going to deliver and actually fix all these problems that are there? Because we've talked about these problems for a long time. We've been talking about the debt for a long time, and it's gotten worse under both Republicans and Democrats. We've talked about the border for a long time, and yet we still are dealing with it to this day. So we've talked about the growth of government, and yet government has continued to get bigger regardless of who has been in charge. So I think the time for talk is over. We understand that. People have been talking for a long time. And the question is are we going to actually be able to turn the ship around? And that's going to require strong leadership. It's going to require a plan to get this done. And it's going to require that we win a lot of elections all across the country for House and Senate that we've not really shown as Republicans an ability to win in recent years. And so there's a lot riding on this. I think Florida has shown a way where you can be very successful through bold leadership. But we're just one state of many, and there's going to be a lot of different races going on all throughout the United States of America. But we'll make sure, it's interesting, Florida, when I got elected in 2018, we had almost 300,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. And we had never had more registered Republicans than Democrats in the entire history of the state. 2022, November, that had flipped to 300,000 more Republicans than Democrats. And that was a pretty significant movement to have 4 years to go from negative 300 to positive 300. And yet since the election of 2022, which was, a little bit, year plus away ago, we now have close to 800,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. So that's another 500,000 net gain. And it's not all that there are more Republicans signing. Some of that is, but some of it is just people have dropped off the rolls and all this stuff, and you're doing that. But that is a really significant movement. And I think on this pace, we probably by November will have a net 1 million more registered Republicans than Democrats based on where we've gone so far. So I think that's something that's really, really positive. But it just shows you that's what leadership does. People, they are going to gravitate to good results. And we see that in the migration patterns. We also see it in the party change patterns. So we're going to continue to do that. We'll have a lot of good results this legislative session, and Florida will continue to lead the way. Thanks, everybody. God bless.